From NTD News, I'm Jasmina Davis. Here are today's top stories. President Trump is starting daily virus briefings at the White House again. He warned the virus situation worldwide would likely get worse before it gets better, and advised people to wear masks. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed it deployed officers from different operational units to Portland, some of whom wear camouflage uniforms. The DHS reassured the commitment to defending federal buildings in the city. A Minnesota judge lifted the gag order in the George Floyd case. He said it didn't work the way he intended it to. Ohio's House Speaker is facing charges over bribery. A U.S. attorney says it's Ohio's largest bribery and money laundering scheme ever. According to the governor of Florida, the virus situation in the state is improving, with plans to reopen schools for in-class instructions. And the president of Ukraine ends a hostage crisis. He convinces the hostage taker by phone to release everyone. Find out how he did it. The U.S. has ordered the Chinese consulate in Houston to close. The State Department pointed to sovereignty violations and intimidation tactics. Its statement says the closure is to protect American intellectual property along with Americans' private information. State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus also hinted at violations of international regulations for diplomats. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said it would retaliate if the United States did not revoke the order. Social media videos showing people burning documents on the consulate grounds. The Houston Fire Department went to investigate, but not were allowed access. President Trump advises the use of masks. He addressed concerns in renewed White House daily virus briefings.
Today I want to provide an update on our response to the China virus and what my administration is doing to get the outbreak in the Sun Belt under control.
President Trump resumed the White House coronavirus briefings on Tuesday evening. Once a regular fixture, they were discontinued weeks ago. But the message this time was more somber, with the realism perhaps gained through what is now months of experience.
It will probably, unfortunately, get worse before it gets better. Something I don't like saying about things, but that's the way it is. It's what we have. You look over the world, it's all over the world.
Arizona, Texas, California, Florida, and other states have seen significant increases in infections in recent days. The president delivered new advice. He recommended that Americans should wear masks, adding, "Whether you like the mask or not," a change in tone by the president, who has received criticism for not wearing a mask on some official visits and other occasions. He said his administration will do all it can to try to save lives. He confirmed a growing understanding about the virus that has continued to inform government response. He noted that the U.S. is tackling outbreaks from a different starting point. When the virus first hit, there was little known about it and few necessary medical resources. Now, U.S. supplies are well stocked with life-saving ventilators and PPE. He also noted that the U.S. levels of testing exceed that of any other country. He said he would take the advice of health professionals and doctors as to whether more testing was needed. The president was to be briefed later on the question of increased funding for tests being considered in the next stimulus bill. Regarding the next economic relief bill, he said much progress was being made.
I know that both sides want to get it done. We'll call it phase 4. I think we're going to get it done. We'll protect our workers, our schools, and our families, and protect them very strongly.
And he said the administration is doing well with the development of a vaccine.
The Pentagon confirmed that no Department of Defense assets have been deployed to Portland, but U.S. Homeland Security officials have taken a different route. They say they're standing by an effort to bring peace and order to the city.
The Department of Homeland Security confirmed it deployed officers from 3 special operations units to Portland. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf said DHS officers wear camouflage because that's their uniform when they work on the border. Nightly demonstrations involving violence towards officers and damage to property have continued in Portland since May, in a section of downtown that includes the federal courthouse. The unrest forcing most businesses in the zone to close. Wolf said the people committing vandalism should not be considered legitimate protesters.
My message is very simple. If you're looking to peacefully protest in Portland, the department respects your right to do so. Please do so away from the violent activity that is taking place near the courthouse on a nightly basis for your own safety.
He said in clashes with federal personnel, rioters have used lasers, bats, fireworks, bottles, and other weapons. Wolf said it was his duty to ensure federal buildings like the courthouse are protected from groups who have repeatedly tried to set it on fire.
We know they've tried. We have them on video trying that multiple different times. So we have a responsibility. I read it to you. It says the secretary shall protect buildings. It doesn't say you can. It doesn't give me the option. It says I shall.
Criticism aimed at federal officers described the use of unmarked vans and generic police patches that detained several people, allegedly without identifying themselves. A Pentagon spokesman expressed the concerns of Defense Secretary Mark Esper at the confusion between military personnel and Border Patrol agents who both wear camouflage uniforms. The Pentagon confirmed that no Department of Defense assets have been deployed to or are pending deployment in Portland.
Oregon's Democratic senators are proposing a bill that would restrict federal agents when deployed to cities like Portland. The bill proposed by Senator Jeff Merkley would limit the areas federal agents are allowed to work in. If passed, they would be restricted to federal property and the street adjacent to the property. It would then be illegal for agents to make arrests outside these bounds. The bill would also require federal agents to always display identifying information in a clearly visible fashion. That's including the agency's name, like DHS, and their last name. But DHS says the uniforms of their officers already have insignias and patches that say what department they're from. The 4 former police officers accused in the death of George Floyd made a court appearance yesterday. One officer attended via video conference. The big news is that the judge lifted a gag order, allowing parties to speak publicly about the case.
A gag order is now lifted in the case against 4 police officers involved in the death of George Floyd. One of the officers' attorneys filed police body camera videos with the court earlier this month. The attorney said he wanted the videos to be made public. That's when the Minneapolis judge banned parties from speaking publicly about the case. But the judge says it didn't work as intended. Attorneys for the former officers said the gag order was unfair because it limited their ability to defend their clients from bad publicity. And news outlets said the gag order intruded on their rights to free speech. The judge made the videos available for in-person viewing by appointment only, but did not allow them to be made public. Floyd died on May 25th while being detained by the officers. Video showed former officer Derek Chauvin with his knee on Floyd's neck. Chauvin was charged with second-degree murder. The other officers were on the scene when it happened. They were charged with aiding and abetting. All 4 officers were fired. Floyd's death sparked international protests and riots, with unrest in some areas still going on. The judge will rule on other motions related to the trial in the coming days, including whether to release the body camera footage to the public.
President Trump has signed a memorandum that will exclude illegal aliens from the process of dividing congressional seats. It's a calculation based on the population survey conducted during the 2020 census, after the Supreme Court rejected the White House bid to add a citizenship question to the census. Trump ordered all federal agencies to share information with the Department of Commerce. The information enables the department to determine the number of citizens, non-citizens, and illegal aliens in the U.S. The memo notes that states that thwart federal laws should not be rewarded with increased representation in Congress. One of the most powerful politicians in the state of Ohio is accused in a bribery and money laundering probe. Ohio's speaker was arrested and charged yesterday. Now, Ohio's governor is calling for him to resign.
Ohio House Speaker Larry Householder and 4 associates were arrested and charged Tuesday in a $60 million federal bribery case. He was released and ambushed by angry protesters demanding answers outside the court. The case is connected to a taxpayer-funded bailout of Ohio's 2 nuclear power plants. A U.S. attorney described it as the largest bribery and money laundering scheme ever perpetrated against the state. The U.S. attorney said the 5 defendants passed and maintained a $1.5 billion bailout in return for over $60 million in dark money. Authorities say some of the money was used to get Republican Householder the post of Speaker. An entity called Generation Now was also named. Householder allegedly controlled it secretly and started receiving quarterly payments of $250,000 from a company into a bank account in his name. Householder and his associates worked on getting House Bill 6 passed and signed by Ohio's governor. The U.S. attorney says there's no evidence the governor's office was involved in the scheme. The FBI special agent in charge said rooting out public corruption is extremely difficult, and the announcement is a warning that all forms of public corruption are unacceptable.
Up next, California tops New York for number of current virus cases, but only about 1% of the entire U.S. population has tested positive for the virus. And a Florida governor is being sued by a teachers union that says they don't feel safe returning to school. And some New York City dwellers are on the hunt for more space. That's after a months-long lockdown that kept them inside the city's notoriously small apartments. That and more after the break. The governor of Florida says the virus situation in the state is improving. He is planning to reopen schools for in-class instructions.
Florida's Republican governor said the state was on the upswing in its battle to contain the pandemic. Like Georgia and Texas, Florida has recently seen record hospitalizations of around 10,000 per day. Florida has become the focal point of the latest virus surge. That triggered the state's teachers union to sue Republican Governor Ron DeSantis over his plan to reopen schools for in-class instruction. But DeSantis is positive about the state's future.
So these things take time, but I do think that I think the trend is much better today than the trend was 2 weeks ago.
DeSantis said over the weekend that virus positivity rates and emergency room visits have been lower in recent weeks.
Statewide, 24% of the hospital beds in the state of Florida are empty. That's over 14,000 hospital beds, and about 20% of the ICU beds are empty.
Neither Florida nor Georgia have issued statewide mask mandates. Texas's Abbott initially resisted requiring masks, but earlier this month agreed to mandate them in most counties.
There are now close to 4 million CCP virus cases in the U.S. That's about 1% of the population. California, Florida, and Texas have the most right now. Conversation about school reopenings continues. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the latest updates about the situation.
Latest data from the CDC shows that over the past couple of weeks, the nation has seen around 60,000 new virus cases per day. Deaths nationwide have reached more than 140,000. To put that into perspective, about 1% of the U.S. population has tested positive for the virus, and of those cases, about 3% have died from it. California has the highest number of current cases in the country. Now Los Angeles may be on the brink of a second lockdown, the mayor has warned, if the situation doesn't improve there. As for school, both Los Angeles and San Diego have already decided they will not hold in-person classes at the start of the school year. Quite the opposite situation in Florida. The Board of Education issued an emergency order to have schools reopen at least 5 days per week, staying consistent with safety precautions. But then, a teachers' union filed a lawsuit to sue the governor and the Board of Education over the order.
If a teacher does not feel comfortable there and they want to maybe do their job distance, if that's what's comfortable. And I think
he said it's obvious that some parts of the state have more severe situations than others, and that ultimately, parents should have the chance to choose what's best for their kids. And Vice President Mike Pence says school reopening is a priority.
There are almost greater risks to children not being in school than there are to children being in school.
Pence says there is bipartisan support for a $30 billion fund for state education efforts. And he says that negotiation discussions are starting this week about a new relief package, with funding for schools to reopen safely high on the priority list. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Texas's daily CCP virus count is right behind the nation's second highest, Florida's, but the Texas governor appears to be against a second lockdown. He overruled a county that wants residents to stay home. He says social distancing and masks are good enough to keep businesses open. An update on the massive fire in Northeast California. The hog fire has burned about 8,000 acres so far. Officials say the fire started Sunday in Lassen County at Hog Flat, hence the name, but they still don't know how it started. About 171 buildings are at risk and evacuations are still in place. CAL FIRE said fighting this fire could get harder if it gets any hotter and if the humidity drops. The area is under a red flag warning until Tuesday evening. Following a months-long lockdown, some New York State have decided they don't want to go through it again in a city that's known for its crowds. The need for more space has sent real estate sales booming outside the 5 boroughs.
New Yorkers anxious about enduring another pandemic in the crowds and small apartments of New York City are feeling a boom in home sales and rentals upstate. Real estate brokers and agents describe a booming market recently since many are now able to work from home. Anil and Joyce Lilly belong to the group of house hunters that are working remotely. They just bought a house an hour north in the Hudson Valley. That way, if the outbreak roars back into the city, they won't be sheltering in their Bronx apartment.
I think the pandemic really caused the glue to hold the commitment we had to Manhattan to fall away.
Although many New Yorkers are taking similar steps, New York City is in no danger of hollowing out anytime soon. The upstate wave looks more like a trickle in a city of over 8 million, with new homes in the region ranging from $200,000 to more than $1 million. They're an escape hatch many cannot afford. But the spike in sales and long-term rentals suggests New Yorkers who endured the worst of the pandemic see the city as less hospitable. Agents say people are now fighting bidding wars over homes that have been sitting on the market for a long time before the pandemic, and new listings are being snapped up fast by buyers with cash.
A dramatic rescue when a man was saved from a burning boat on Lake Tahoe. Look at this, a man was on the lake when his boat somehow caught fire. Not only that, it reportedly had about 40 gallons of fuel on board. Another boater saw the man needed help and was able to get him off the burning boat. The Coast Guard arrived a short time later. The man was taken to a local hospital, but no reported injuries. Coming up, Chinese authorities are taking extreme measures to get flooding under control, including blasting open parts of a dam. That's as over 10,000 people have been trapped by floodwaters in one small town. And a new anonymous form of protest can be seen in shops and restaurants in Hong Kong. It follows the controversial security law imposed by the Chinese Communist Party. More on that when we return.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country have just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try The Epic Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values and reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global pandemic, and so much more, then you need to try The Epoch Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just $1, and we'll send you a very special gift. A 58-page magazine that investigates the truth behind the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up of the virus. So go to readepoch.com, try The Epoch Times, get your free gift, and stay truly informed.
Two Chinese hackers affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party were indicted for allegedly stealing intellectual property. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on the hackers and what they're accused of going after, which included COVID-related information.
The Justice Department says the two hackers, part of China's Ministry of State Security, stole hundreds of millions of dollars in trade secrets, intellectual property, and other valuable information globally. They apparently also went after COVID-19 related intelligence.
The campaign targeted intellectual property and confidential business information held by the private sector, including COVID-19 related treatment, testing, and vaccines.
Both hackers are also accused of stealing the private data of Chinese people who publicly oppose the Chinese regime, Hong Kong community organizers, and other information.
As I said earlier, they have done this partially for their own personal gain, it would appear, but also for the obvious interest of the People's Republic of China's Ministry of State Security.
This indictment is part of the president's China Initiative launched in 2018, which aims at countering China's espionage and other forms of infiltration carried out by the regime. The deputy director of the FBI says this indictment is a warning.
We're bringing these charges today to put the Chinese leaders directing these cyber attacks on notice.
The FBI is looking for any information on the whereabouts of the two suspects. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
A colorful and anonymous form of protest can be seen popping up in shops and restaurants in Hong Kong. It follows the controversial security law imposed by the Chinese Communist Party that makes several forms of free speech a crime.
Blank Post-it notes cover the window at Yu Yi Cafe in Wan Chai, Hong Kong. But these pieces of paper are more than just colorful decoration. They are a form of resistance. Shops used to provide space for people to hang notes expressing their support of the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. But with the tough new national security law, those displays are rapidly disappearing as people fear their messages could be used to prosecute them. So some places are taking a creative approach, keeping the note papers but leaving them blank. It's a way of remembering the popular spirit of the protests and symbolizing despair at being silenced.
I wonder if there's still rule of law if sticking a piece of paper on the wall is illegal. Actually, it looks fine to me. It's just using a different way to express our demands. If you don't allow us to protest this way, we'll find another way to protest.
Shops sympathetic to the protesters' cause are known as Yellow. Kok Kok Chicken is another yellow restaurant. Its owner is determined to display blank Post-it notes.
The national security law has been passed. Even holding pieces of blank paper in protest is against the law and can result in arrest. We are doing this right now because here is our private property.
Hong Kong's national security law makes pro-democracy protest activities illegal. Shouting slogans or holding up banners calling for the region's autonomy is considered a violation of the law. The maximum penalty is life imprisonment.
Flooding continues across China. Flood warnings have been issued for all 3 major rivers in China. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
Floods have been raging in China for nearly 2 months now. The country's famous Yangtze River has already reached its highest recorded water level in half a century. But if history is any indicator, China's rainy season has just begun. It usually lasts from the second half of July to the first half of August. Flood warnings for the country's 2 longest rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, as well as the Huai River, have been issued. The Huai River is located between the Yangtze and the Yellow Rivers. It's been dubbed the most difficult river to manage in China, thanks to its tendency to shift and move. A red level flood warning, the highest possible level, was issued on Tuesday. The Yangtze River's second highest flood record this year was recorded at the Three Gorges Dam over the weekend. But amid heavy rain, a new wave of floods is forming and will soon make its way towards the dam. A band of strong rainstorms in the area has since moved further north. As for the Yellow River, a warning was issued on Monday ahead of its second wave of flooding. That's as the area surrounding the upper reaches of the river imposed a level 4 emergency response, the lowest, least dangerous level, despite the danger. The river's flow rate has already reached 3,000 cubic meters per second, and forecasters say it'll continue to rise. The Yellow River's first peak was recorded a month ago when it first clocked in at about 2,000 cubic meters per second. The Yellow River Committee predicts the flood crisis will extend to even more provinces and regions, including Qinghai, Gansu, Ningxia, and Inner Mongolia. This year's harvest is coming up empty in China. Flooding in the southern and central regions, plus drought in the north, have hugely reduced the country's viable crops. Take the city of Anshi inside Hubei province, where recent floods have been getting worse. More recent video shows some crops in the city have been soaked. A woman in the video explains that there used to be a road under what's now a completely submerged area. In the video, she says she estimates the water is around 6 feet deep. She also points to fields of corn in the area, all underwater. Elsewhere, a field of corn is in a similar state. And for around a month, these fields have more closely resembled a lake. Besides the country's floods, northern China is now suffering from a drought as well. According to Chinese media, the continued drought in Gansu province has severely stunted the area's production of wheat, corn, and other crops. A local resident said he's never seen such a dry year in all of his 50 years. A recent video showed a woman from China's Xinjiang region pointing to the area's seemingly endless wheat fields, but she says there won't be a good harvest. That's because this year's wheat crop has died due to the drought. And in the northeastern provinces of Heilongjiang and Liaoning, crops are suffering extreme temperatures. According to Chinese media, the highest recorded temperature there has exceeded 100 degrees, and it's having a big impact on corn production. So far, no mainstream media outlets in China have reported on it.
Over 10,000 people in a small town in southern China are trapped due to flooding. Local authorities took extreme measures to tackle the floodwater, like blasting open an embankment. NTD's Juliet Song has the story.
China's southeastern Anhui province is now in an urgent situation. In one of the towns in the region, over 10,000 people are trapped due to flooding, waiting to be rescued.
We don't have any food here. Now there's neither water nor electricity, nothing.
The flooding has devastated some local businesses.
Many of the local factories make a living producing down products. In some factories, the floodwater washed away all the down they have.
Authorities say most of those trapped by the flooding are children and the elderly. Mr. Yu, who works in Shanghai, was rushing home, trying to help evacuate his 8 family members who were trapped on the second floor of their home.
The water has flooded the first floor of the house.
On Saturday, local authorities raised the flooding warning alert to its highest level. Heavy rain and massive flooding from upstream caused water levels in Anhui province to quickly rise. On Sunday, a major river in the region saw its water level nearing a historic high. At 3 a.m., Chinese authorities took extreme measures and blew open a dam on the river. The floodwater then flew into 2 buffer areas. State media said the move is expected to reduce the water level by almost 30 inches. They said people living in the buffer areas have been evacuated, but didn't specify the numbers. Chinese authorities used the same tactic in 1998 during China's worst flooding in recent decades. On Monday, after another major river saw its water going above its highest warning level, authorities ordered another dam on the river to discharge the floodwater. Water spilled into another buffer area with a population of almost 200,000 people. Authorities say over 2,000 have been evacuated. On China's popular social media site, Weibo, the flooding is getting little attention. Trending keywords are celebrity news, popular dramas, and virus vaccine achievements. Reporting by Xiong Bin and Juliet Song, NTD News.
Millions of dollars from the federal government's Paycheck Protection Program are following to companies and organizations tied to the Chinese Communist Party. These include socialism advocates, CCP state-owned enterprise collaborators, partners of China's Confucius Institutes, and more.
The New York-based China Institute, a partner of China's Confucius Institute, has received up to $1 million from the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP loans. Founded in 1926, China Institute has a nearly 100-year history of working alongside the Chinese Communist Party. The advocacy group hosted the first Confucius Institute in New York in 2006, working in partnership with the East China Normal University. It's a state-funded university that states in its bylaws the Communist Party committee shall make collective decisions and that the university president shall implement the collective decisions. Their collaboration eventually led to Confucius Institutes taking root in 9 U.S. K-12 schools. Similarly, the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations also received up to $1 million from the Paycheck Protection Program. Like the China Institute, its Confucius Institute partner did as well. According to the Confucius Institute newsletter, the committee has been holding annual joint conferences with the University of Delaware's Confucius Institute since 2010. The meetings are dubbed Chinatown Halls. The newsletter describes the conference as an occasion where talents from Delaware politics, economics, business, and academia come together for important dialogue on U.S.-China relations. Yet another pro-Chinese Communist Party organization that is receiving PPP funds is the 46-year-old Chinese Progressive Association in San Francisco. According to the U.S. Treasury Department's records, it too received up to $1 million from the federal government. According to communism expert and author Trevor Loudon, the Progressive Chinese Association was founded by key members of IWK, an organization that claims to apply the science of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought to the U.S. Revolution. It also has a strong connection with the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
Coming up, a new bill seeks to hold big companies accountable for the use of slave labor in their supply chains. A new report found some big companies may be benefiting from forced labor in China. And discount grocer Aldi is gaining ground on household names like Kroger and Walmart as it expands nationwide. More on that after the break.
大提琴不仅仅是一件乐器，它是有生命、有感情的，需要我们精心的照顾。往往我们一个小小的动作，可能都会对人情绪产生微妙的影响。天音的品牌是福星，我们对于传统的理念很荣幸被神韵艺术团选为指定供应商。时间是酿造音色的不可替代的陪伴。我跟大提琴已经有60多年的友情了，每一把琴都有它自己的个性，熟悉它 才能真正发挥它的潜力。所以，我希望给你的每一把琴，都是首先我所信任的。
Senator Josh Hawley wants to know if American companies are using slave labor in their products. He's introduced a bill after a new report says some large corporations could be benefiting from forced labor in China. Patrick Hayden has the details.
U.S. Senator Josh Hawley is introducing a bill to make sure large American companies aren't using slave labor in supply chains. The Slave-Free Business Certification Act expands supply chain transparency requirements and orders regular audits. It also mandates CEOs to certify that their company's products do not rely on forced or slave labor. Companies that fail to meet these basic standards will be penalized. The bill comes off the back of a report by an Australian think tank that says more than 80 companies have been tied to forced labor in China. Some of the companies implicated in the report were Amazon, Nike, North Face, BMW, and Gap. Hawley wrote on Twitter, "I challenge every major American corporation making products overseas in China or elsewhere to pledge that they are slave-free and that they do not and will not rely on forced slave labor." The Chinese communist regime is well known for using prisoners of conscience in its labor camps. Two of the largest targeted groups are Falun Gong practitioners and ethnic Uyghurs. Hawley's office wrote that the issues extend beyond China. For example, Starbucks and Nespresso rely on unpaid Brazilian workers who are denied basic needs like food and water.
LinkedIn says it's laying off 6% of its global workforce. That's nearly 1,000 jobs. It's just one of the many large corporations announcing layoffs. The job cuts are across its global sales and hiring sections, but the company's CEO said no further layoffs are planned. Employees will receive at least 10 weeks of severance pay, and in the U.S., a year of continued health coverage. This comes as the U.S. unemployment rate remains at 11.1%. It suggests companies nationwide are still cutting jobs. Discount grocer Aldi is planning to add dozens of new stores this year in the U.S., and unlike most companies, it's actually getting a boost from the pandemic.
Discount grocer Aldi says it will open more than 70 new stores this year. It's part of an ambitious 5-year plan to become the third largest U.S. grocer, behind Walmart and Kroger. The company hopes to have 2,500 stores by 2022. The German company opened its first U.S. store in 1976. It focuses on low-cost, quality products and money-saving business practices. The company said it will invest over $5 billion to build new stores, remodel existing ones, and expand its selection. Aldi has seen rapid progress. It now has about 2,000 stores. It's not far behind Kroger, which has nearly 2,800. It has increased its fresh food selection by 40% and hopes to have curbside pickup available at 600 stores by the end of the month. And the pandemic isn't hurting Aldi's progress. Grocery spending is up 10% compared to last year. Rising food prices coupled with high unemployment means customers are looking more and more to value chains like Aldi for better deals.
Up next, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited the UK. He praised it for its principled response to the challenges posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Find out more when we return.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
Over to Europe, where U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. They discussed how to tackle the growing threat of China. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow brings us more.
Thanks. Welcome to the NTD UK newsroom, bringing you UK and European news. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on a two-day visit to the UK, a big part of the discussion on how to tackle the growing threat of China.
Pompeo and Prime Minister Boris Johnson discussed shared global security issues, including China's actions in Hong Kong and Xinjiang.
Social distance does not imply diplomatic or political distance.
Pompeo then met counterpart Dominic Raab.
We talked about how we've seen Hong Kong's freedoms crushed. We've watched the CCP bully its neighbors, militarize features in the South China Sea, and instigate a deadly confrontation with India.
He congratulated the UK for its principled responses to the many challenges posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Raab expressed a wish to work together with the US to stand up for shared values.
The UK is really clear that we need to work with our American friends and also with other partners together in the international system to protect our freedoms and interests.
Last week, the UK announced a ban on China's Huawei, a decision praised by President Donald Trump. As the UK toughens its stance on Beijing over its mishandling of the pandemic and crackdown in Hong Kong, Pompeo's visit is regarded as an attempt to stiffen Johnson's resolve.
Moving on, Uber is defending its business model in Britain's Supreme Court. It's a battle over rights in the workplace. In a case brought by two drivers in 2016, a London tribunal ruled they were entitled to workers' rights, such as minimum wage, paid holidays and rest breaks. Currently, Uber drivers are treated as self-employed. Uber says drivers were under no obligation to use the app at any time or to accept trips offered to them. The outcome could have ramifications for millions of Britons engaged in the gig economy. And Uber faces a similar case in Canada. A ruling is expected in October at the earliest. To the top of UK government. After months of online meetings, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson holds his first face-to-face cabinet meeting since the lockdown.
The meeting underlines Johnson's push to encourage Britons to get back to work to boost the economy. Supplied with hand sanitizer and individual bottles of water, ministers were asked to attend a socially distanced meeting in a larger room inside the Foreign Office, rather than the traditional cabinet room in Downing Street.
There will be difficult months ahead for our people and for our country, but no one will be without hope. And we will build back better, and come through this crisis more strongly than ever before.
Johnson recently pushed ahead with easing the lockdown. People can now use public transportation, and starting August 1st, businesses can decide policies around working in the office.
To Europe, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas says Turkey must stop drilling in eastern Mediterranean waters. Turkey says it is drilling in waters covered by an agreement between Ankara and Libya. But Greece calls it geographically absurd, saying any such agreement ignores the existence of the Greek island of Crete between the coasts of Turkey and Libya.
International law must be respected, so progress in EU-Turkey relations is only possible if Ankara stops provocations in the eastern Mediterranean.
Tensions are already high between NATO allies Greece and Turkey because of Turkish drilling off the Cyprus coast. Moving on, founders of music streaming app SoundCloud are launching a unique e-bike subscription service in Berlin. Named Dance, the invite-only service costs $67 a month. In contrast to bike sharing, this subscription model gives each rider their own e-bike. If the e-bike needs repairs or is stolen, Dance will immediately replace it. E-bike sales are booming in Europe at an average cost of over $2,600 each. Dance plans to go international once it has refined its bike design, app and operating model. That's all from NTD UK Newsroom. Back over to New York.
All 13 people taken hostage on a bus in western Ukraine have been freed. They were unharmed. The country's president spoke by phone with the hostage taker and agreed to his demand to endorse a 2005 animal rights documentary.
A siege gripped a city in western Ukraine on Tuesday that involved the president, a documentary promotion, and a bus of hostages. 44-year-old man, later identified as Maxim Kravosh, seized a bus in the city of Lutsk, saying he was armed with guns and explosives. He then threatened to blow up the bus and detonate another in a crowded area in the city. In a move to secure the hostages' release, President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to Kravosh for several minutes before agreeing to his demand to endorse an animal rights documentary made in 2005 called Earthlings, narrated by Hollywood actor Joaquin Phoenix. The president said he had persuaded Kravosh to first release 3 hostages, including a pregnant woman. Then Zelensky fulfilled the demand and posted a 6-second clip on Facebook to promote the film.
Фильм «Земляне» 2005 года.
It was later deleted after the release. The president had been given the option to launch an assault on the bus, but didn't want to risk the hostages. After the release of all 13 hostages unharmed, he said, quote, "We have the result. Everyone is alive." Footage showed a small bus parked in the middle of an empty street with 2 windows smashed. Police said Kravosh had thrown a grenade out of the bus and fired shots at the police. The Interior Minister said Kravosh had served time in prison and propagated, quote, extremist views.
Coming up, a Russian teenager is back on the soccer field after being struck by lightning. Find out more after the break.
This week on America Uncovered, U.S.-China tensions have never been higher, but there's more to come as the U.S. sends warships through the South China Sea. Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NTD America.
5,000 years of Chinese music and dance in one night.
Just so inspiring. It makes me want to go dance.
Breathtaking, brilliant.
It's out of this world.
The coronavirus outbreak is the latest wake-up call.
U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it plainly. The Chinese Communist Party has lied, is lying, and will continue to lie about coronavirus to protect the regime.
In 5 to 10 years, we'll have virtually no manufacturing capacity left for generic drugs. And again, this is 90% of our medicines.
And the world should know, if Hong Kong falls, the whole world falls, okay? Because the Chinese Communist Party is the existential risk of humanity, period.
Since the CCP took power, 80 million people have died from its policies and political campaigns.
They're using our institutions and our norms and our values against us in ways that we hadn't necessarily envisioned towards their own authoritarian agenda.
From the party's great firewall in cyberspace, or to that great wall of sand in the South China Sea.
More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well.
If we do not meet this threat now, it's going to define our century.
Brazil's Olympic athletes are starting to train again after the country's Olympic Committee reopening training centers in Rio de Janeiro.
Athletes resumed their training under strict biosecurity measures amidst the pandemic. The Brazilian Olympic Committee says athletes who secured a place for the Tokyo Olympics or are close to qualifying were the first to return to the training centers.
It's a good time for us to go back. Looking forward to the 2021 Olympics. The feeling of starting over to fulfill a dream. Today's first practice was a warm-up.
Strict health protocols include individual training, limited access to sports facilities, and disinfection of training equipment. We're facing a very difficult time, but we'll get through it. We're going to resume training. We're going to work very hard next year so that the athletes arrive in good condition at the 2021 Olympics and can represent Brazil. Around the world, sporting events and training sessions were suspended for several months, and athletes trained at home during the pandemic. I came from Denmark with a knee problem and was being checked from a distance. I returned on June 23rd and was in quarantine. Training at home is not the same as training here. I am very motivated to recover quickly and return 100% in preparation for Tokyo. Brazil now has over 2 million CCP virus cases and over 80,000 deaths.
Tokyo has rescheduled the 2020 Olympic Games for July 23rd through August 28th, 2021. And a Russian teenager who was struck by lightning at his soccer practice has miraculously returned to the field, mere weeks after the life-threatening incident.
When 16-year-old goalkeeper Ivan Zaborovsky was rushed to hospital after being struck by lightning during a warm-up, few thought he would survive. Footage from the stadium outside Moscow where his youth team FC Znamya Truda were training on July 4th showed a lightning bolt ripping through a gloomy sky, which struck Zaborovsky, who collapsed onto the ground unconscious. Coach Anton Basov ran over to discover his goalkeeper lying face down on the field. He flipped him over to find the front of his jersey had been burnt.
His jersey was ripped on his chest, not ripped, more like burned out. We began to try and resuscitate him.
After Basov performed first aid, Zaborovsky was taken to hospital where he was put into an induced coma to assess his injuries. Less than 3 weeks later, Zaborovsky returned to the field. The only thing that reminds him of the potential fatal lightning strike is a burn on his chest, where he had been wearing a chain.
My lungs. It was difficult to breathe, but that's about it. It's getting better and better now. Things are back to normal.
On Tuesday, Zaborovsky signed a contract with his club's senior team, which plays in Russia's 3rd division, something that had been planned before the lightning strike.
And that's all for now. Catch us again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Jasmina Davis.
Just why do we see so many support dogs on planes these days? And how is this a window into a much broader phenomenon? Why does Adam Carolla think emotion and woke culture have overtaken logic and reason in America? And why does everything nowadays seem to revolve around President Trump? In this episode, we sit down with comedian Adam Carolla, host of The Adam Carolla Show. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and his newest book is titled, I'm Your Emotional Support Animal, Navigating Our All-Woke, No-Joke Culture. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
China's famous Yangtze River has already reached its highest recorded water level in half a century. Now, flood warnings for the Yellow and Hua rivers have been issued, but China's rainy season has just begun. Chinese authorities are taking extreme measures to get flooding under control, including blasting open parts of a dam. And in one small southern town, over 10,000 have been trapped by floodwaters. Concerns are rising over China's food supply. Flooding in southern and central regions, plus drought in the north, have hugely reduced the country's viable crops. 2 Chinese hackers affiliated with the Communist Party were indicted in the U.S. for stealing intellectual property, including information related to the virus. And $60 million cash was found at the home of a Chinese official. But he's not the first one to do it. That's after he's been put under investigation for corruption. Tune in at 9:30.